I have some deeply troubling news about England's royal family. A shocking arrest has just taken place, and a priceless royal artifact has completely vanished from behind the heavily locked doors of Buckingham Palace. Right now, Queen Camilla's name is at the dead centre of a massive crisis that could easily shake the entire British monarchy to its absolute core. What seemed like a routine celebration has suddenly transformed into a full-blown criminal investigation. It all began under the golden sunlight of a splendid summer day when Annabel Elliot, who is Queen Camilla's biological sister, unexpectedly appeared at a private gathering inside the palace gardens. At the time, she wasn't even on the official guest list that had been carefully reviewed beforehand. But no one present thought her seemingly harmless presence would spark an international storm. Just 1 hour after the high society party officially ended, one of the most valuable pieces of jewelry in the entire royal collection was discovered missing without a trace. While a stunned King Charles ordered an urgent and immediate investigation, deeply suspicious details quickly began to emerge from the shadows. Security cameras captured unexplained time gaps, a trusted royal protection officer suddenly vanished into thin air, and every single clue seemed to lead the investigators toward an awful answer that absolutely nobody wanted to face. Was this merely a daring, high-stakes theft? Or was there a far greater, darker secret hidden right beneath the surface? The answers would soon completely shatter the peace of the royal household. If the king's growing suspicions were correct, he would soon be forced to make the most painful choice of his entire life. Would he choose to protect his own family, or would he stand up to protect the honor of the crown? In the summer of 2026, Buckingham Palace was adorned in its most splendid and majestic glory under the shimmering afternoon sun. The lush green royal gardens were impeccably trimmed, with vibrant poppies and English roses in full bloom, creating a flawless picture of pride and historic grandeur. This special party, commemorating individuals who had been closely tied to the monarchy throughout King Charles III's reign, was held with great pomp and ceremony. It was supposed to serve as a loud declaration of total stability and unity after a long period of public upheavals. The guests were all highly familiar faces, ranging from major political donors and trusted advisors to senior members of the royal family itself. The atmosphere buzzed with the melodious sound of live violins, sparkling champagne glasses, and polite, whispered conversations. King Charles entered the Grand Hall with a traditionally dignified bearing, but his tired eyes clearly showed the heavy fatigue from his months of intensive medical treatment. He smiled as warmly as he could while greeting each distinguished guest, bearing the massive responsibility of a sovereign entirely on his shoulders. But then, in a single, sudden moment, as his gaze swept across the crowded room, he froze completely. In the far corner of the room, standing near the tall arched windows, stood a woman he knew all too well. It was Annabel Elliot. She was wearing an elegant dark-colored dress, casually holding a glass of fine wine, and chatting cheerfully with a few of the guests. But her name had been completely absent from the official invitation list that Charles had meticulously reviewed just days before. A sudden wave of intense suspicion surged deep within the king's heart. Charles clenched his fists tightly, forcing a polite smile to remain glued to his lips, but his voice carried a sharp, unmistakable tension as he turned to his wife. He quietly asked Camilla exactly when her sister had arrived, noting that he had no recollection of approving her name for the event. Camilla spun around abruptly, her bright smile momentarily stiffening in panic. She gently took her husband's hand, keeping her voice incredibly gentle but fast. She told him that Annabel was simply family, a blood relative, and that she had personally invited her because she felt this was an extended family gathering where everyone should enjoy themselves. She urged him not to make a big deal out of it, whispering that causing an unnecessary commotion would ruin the lovely atmosphere. She begged him to trust her and promised that everything would be completely fine. Charles looked deeply into his wife's eyes, desperately searching for absolute sincerity. He loved Camilla deeply and had stood firmly by her side through countless public ups and downs over the decades, but this specific moment made him sense a strange, invisible distance growing between them. He reluctantly nodded, determined not to spoil the historic party in front of their important guests. He told her they would talk clearly after everyone left, but his low voice carried a rapidly growing unease. The party continued amidst lively laughter and sophisticated conversation, and Annabel mingled skillfully with the crowd, sharing old family anecdotes. But Charles simply could not focus on the event. He observed the room from afar, noticing that Annabel occasionally glanced at her watch with hurried, nervous gestures. The royal atmosphere remained outwardly elegant, but inside the king's heart, the first dangerous seeds of doubt had already taken root. He recalled several past occasions when Camilla had subtly intervened in sensitive internal matters, and now, Her sister's unexpected appearance made him worry about something much larger. When the party finally drew to a close after the warm toasts, Charles breathed a massive sigh of relief. He and Camilla bid farewell to the last of the guests with professional smiles. But just 1 hour later, as the vast palace fell quiet again, a sudden alarm from the high-security department sent massive shockwaves through the entire royal family. The sapphire Jubilee snowflake brooch had completely vanished from the high-security storage vault. This was a legendary, highly prestigious piece crafted from 48 incredibly rare sapphires sourced from Baffin Island in Canada, along with hundreds of sparkling diamonds. It was a national diplomatic symbol worth well over £24 million, and it had simply disappeared without a single trace. Charles stood entirely frozen in his private office, his face turning pale with an overwhelming mix of rage and disappointment. He slammed his hand hard onto the solid desk, his voice trembling with disbelief. He yelled that it was impossible, declaring that a national treasure of the reign could not just disappear from inside their own home. His heart ached sharply because he knew this was not just a massive material loss. This was a brutal betrayal at the very heart of the monarchy, occurring in a place where he had once placed his absolute trust. The elite security team was immediately mobilized into action. Charles ordered a full, unrestricted inspection of the premises, but in his mind, the suspicious image of Annabel Elliot from earlier in the day grew larger and clearer. Camilla stood tightly by his side, desperately trying to maintain her calm facade, but Charles could easily sense the sharp anxiety rising within her. A peaceful evening had suddenly transformed into the terrifying beginning of a historic storm. King Charles knew full well that this incident was no ordinary, random theft. It had the potential to completely undermine the very foundations of the British monarchy, and he knew he had to face the harshest possible truth. What if the prime suspect was standing right by his side? After the alarm sounded, the entire atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace changed instantly. The grand hallways that had once echoed with laughter were now shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the hurried, heavy footsteps of the royal security team. King Charles could not sit still. He immediately convened a secret emergency meeting in the middle of the night, his resolute voice echoing off the walls of the discreet room. He ordered them to check every single camera, review all entry and exit data, and pull every digital record related to the storage vault. He demanded the absolute truth before the sun rose. The security team worked without a single moment of rest, their surveillance screens glowing under cold, harsh lights. Charles sat right at the center of the room, his eyes entirely fixed on the fast-forwarded footage, his heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and pure fury. He had faced many massive crises in his long life, but he had never imagined that a betrayal this deep would come from inside his inner circle. As the digital images became clearer, Charles gripped the arms of his chair with white knuckles. About 30 minutes before the party had officially ended, the footage showed Annabel Elliot leaving the main gathering area. She moved through the less trafficked side corridors, her movements agile and precise, deliberately avoiding the primary camera coverage. It was clearly no coincidence. She seemed to know the exact location of every single camera blind spot. At that exact same time, the security logs recorded a valid access card being swiped at the heavy door to the treasure vault. The card used was an internal one, strictly reserved for highly authorized staff members who possessed special royal permission. Charles muttered to himself that this could not be a coincidence, his voice low and incredibly tense. He turned sharply to the head of security, his eyes blazing with anger. He pointed out that Annabel had absolutely no legitimate reason to be anywhere near that restricted area. He ordered them to investigate further, noting how incredibly suspicious it was that she showed up uninvited to the party and disappeared at the exact moment the artifact went missing. The head of security nodded quickly, sweat actively beading on his forehead despite the heavily air-conditioned room. He informed the king that the access card was swiped at exactly 22:47, less than an hour before the devastating theft was discovered, and confirmed there were absolutely no signs of forced entry anywhere on the vault door. Charles stood up and paced the room with heavy, deliberate steps as the suspicion grew like a dark tumor inside his heart. He recalled the brief conversation with Camilla just before the party ended, realizing now that she had reassured him far too quickly and far too smoothly. Did Camilla know about this in advance? Was his own wife actively involved in the theft? The terrifying thought pained him deeply. He had chosen Camilla as his wife and granted her the historic position of queen consort with complete trust and absolute love. Now, that very trust was being cruelly tested. He stopped at the window, gazing out into the pitch blackness of the royal gardens. He whispered to himself in profound anguish, wondering what Camilla's actual role was if her own sister had dared to commit such a crime. Charles was not a man to easily suspect his wife, but the initial evidence was simply too clear to ignore. He ordered discreet, quiet checks on all of Camilla's personal activities over the recent weeks and heavily increased surveillance on Annabelle. The dedicated investigation team continued its intense review, uncovering even more suspicious details as the hours ticked by. Annabelle had moved alone for a considerable distance, actively avoiding the main camera areas, and the card data clearly showed that the user possessed intimate knowledge of the palace security system. An ordinary guest would never know these details. Charles sensed it with absolute clarity. This was not an impulsive theft, it was a meticulously planned operation. Meanwhile, in her private room, Camilla tried her best to maintain her composure in front of her personal attendants. She paced the floor restlessly, clutching a silk handkerchief tightly in her hands. She knew her husband was incredibly resolute once his suspicions were aroused. If Charles dug any deeper, their entire world could completely collapse. A deep fear mixed with a fierce determination to protect her royal position, heightening her internal tension to a breaking point. She whispered softly to herself, telling herself to stay calm because Annabelle would surely leave no traces behind. The next morning, the preliminary report landed heavily on Charles's desk, and his suspicions not only persisted but intensified significantly. There were absolutely no signs of an external intrusion, and everything pointed directly to an inside job. Charles sat entirely alone, his head buried in his hands as exhaustion completely overwhelmed him. He had desperately hoped it was all a massive misunderstanding, but reality was pushing him toward a terrifying crossroads: justice or family loyalty. In the following days, the secret investigation proceeded urgently but with absolute discretion. Beneath the palace's calm exterior, a fierce hunt for the truth raged on. Charles spent hours on end in his private office, reviewing every single report and every small detail. The deep pain of betrayal kept him awake night after night, but his determination to uncover the absolute truth only grew stronger. He simply could not allow the British monarchy, the grand symbol of tradition and honor, to be permanently tainted by greed. Meanwhile, deep in memories from several months earlier, the veil of secrecy was gradually being lifted. It had been a drizzly, grey afternoon at Clarence House when Camilla and Annabelle sat together in a private room with the door tightly closed, ensuring no one was allowed to disturb them. The atmosphere had been incredibly heavy, broken only by the steady ticking of an antique clock. Annabelle had gripped her sister's hand tightly, her voice filled with a sense of extreme urgency and high ambition. She told Camilla that they could not sit idle forever, warning that the monarchy could change at any moment. She asked what would become of their position if King Charles was no longer there, or if Prince William suddenly ascended the throne. She pointed out that the Sapphire Jubilee snowflake brooch was their ultimate opportunity, noting it was worth tens of millions of pounds. With that kind of wealth, she promised they would have a completely secure future. Camilla had initially hesitated, her heart full of intense internal conflict. She remembered the incredibly difficult years she faced before becoming queen, and the long struggles to assert her place in the royal family. Her love for Charles was real, but the terrifying fear of losing her power and being pushed to the sidelines made her waver. Finally, she had nodded, her voice low but entirely resolute. She agreed to do it, but warned that they must be extremely careful so that no one would suspect a thing.